It all started because I thought I could handle a week alone. A week in the heart of Black Hollow Woods. No phone, no distractions. Just me, a sketchbook, and the kind of peace that only comes from isolation. At least, that's what I told myself when I rented the cabin. The listing was promising. Rustic retreat, deep in nature, perfect for unwinding. But looking back, I should have been more curious about why it had no reviews. From the first moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The cabin wasn't charmingly rustic. It was decrepit. The kind of place where the wood creaked like it was groaning under the weight of old secrets. But I'd driven 6 hours, and pride wouldn't let me turn back. The first few hours were uneventful. I unpacked, made coffee, and sat on the porch to watch the sun dip below the treeline. It was almost beautiful, the way the shadows stretched across the ground like long, grasping fingers. Almost. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it for the first time. A distant sound, soft but distinct. A low whistle cutting through the dense silence of the woods. It wasn't a bird, nor the wind. It was too deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a hunter signaling to a dog. But when it came again, closer this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for me. The second night, I tried to convince myself the whistle had been my imagination. Maybe I was just spooking myself. But the woods have a way of amplifying fears. They breathe life into your doubts, and by the time the sun set, I was double-checking the locks on the cabin doors. That night, the whistle returned. Started faint, far enough away that I could pretend it wasn't real. But then it grew louder, closer, until it was right outside. 2 notes, long then short. I froze in bed, barely breathing. My pulse thudded in my ears as I strained to hear more. But nothing followed. No footsteps, no rustling leaves. Just a heavy silence that settled like a predator waiting for me to move. The morning couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I forced myself to check outside. I needed to prove it was nothing. A raccoon, a trick of the wind, something. But the moment I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There were footprints, bare footprints, leading from the edge of the woods to my porch, then back into the trees. They were impossibly large, with long, clawed toes that didn't belong to any animal I could name. I spent the rest of the day pacing the cabin, debating whether to leave. But the rational part of my mind insisted it was fine. Maybe someone was messing with me. A prank or a local trying to scare off tourists. That explanation, flimsy as it was, held me together until nightfall. By the third night, the whistle had changed. It started earlier, before the sun even set, echoing from deep within the woods. This time, the notes weren't random. They were rhythmic, deliberate, like someone playing a haunting melody just for me. I tried to ignore it, lighting every lantern in the cabin and turning the radio up loud enough to drown it out. But when the radio began to crackle with static, my chest tightened. The whistle grew louder, almost mocking, as if it knew I was trying to escape it. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. I froze. My eyes darted to the window, but the curtains were drawn. My mind raced. Who would be out here? I hadn't seen another soul since I arrived. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Just silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Then, another knock. This time, slower, louder, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. I grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, my only weapon. My hands were slick with sweat, and my breath came shallow. "I'm armed," I shouted, hoping to sound braver than I felt. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I dared to hope it was over. But then I heard the floorboards creak. Inside the cabin, my knees buckled, and I stumbled back against the wall. The noise came again, slow, deliberate steps coming from the hallway that led to the bedrooms. But I knew I hadn't left the door unlocked. I knew. The poker trembled in my grip as I edged toward the hallway. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking. No answer, just the sound of movement. A shuffle, then a thud, as if something heavy was dragging along the floor. I reached the hallway and peered around the corner, my heart hammering. The shadows stretched unnaturally, the weak light from the living room barely illuminating the narrow corridor. It was empty. I exhaled shakily and backed away. But then I heard the whistle again. This time it came from directly behind me. 2 notes, long then short. I spun around, raising the poker, but there was no one there. Only the cabin's front door, wide open now, swinging gently in the breeze. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak, every gust of wind felt like a threat. When dawn finally came, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I packed what little I'd brought, throwing it haphazardly into my bag, and headed for my car. The forest was eerily still as I loaded the trunk. No birds, no insects, just a suffocating silence that seemed to watch me. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I felt the first pang of relief. I'd leave this nightmare behind. But when I turned the key, the car wouldn't start. I tried again, my hands shaking. Nothing. Just the weak, sputtering groan of a dying engine. Panic surged through me. I popped the hood, desperate to find the problem. But I wasn't a mechanic, and the tangle of wires and metal meant nothing to me. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the gravel. Slow, heavy, coming closer. I spun around, scanning the treeline. First, I saw nothing. But then, deep in the shadows, I caught movement. A figure. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that seemed too long, joints bending in ways they shouldn't. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze, cold and predatory, locked on me. And then it whistled. 2 notes, long then short. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The figure stepped closer, its body jerking unnaturally, like a puppet on tangled strings. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and slammed the car door shut. "Stay back!" I yelled, my voice barely louder than a whisper. It didn't react, just kept advancing, slow and deliberate, the whistle cutting through the air like a taunt. 2 notes, long then short. Desperation took over. I locked the doors and fumbled for my phone, forgetting it had no signal out here. The figure was almost at the edge of the clearing now, its face, or what should have been its face, hidden in the shadows of a hood or some kind of shroud. It reached out one spindly hand, fingers too long, too thin, and pressed it against the car's window. That's when I realized it wasn't alone. From the trees behind it, more figures emerged. Dozens, all just as twisted, their bodies moving in jerky, unnatural motions, their hollow eyes fixed on me. They surrounded the car in a loose circle, their presence suffocating, each of them whistling in unison now. 2 notes, long then short. The sound burrowed into my skull, a maddening harmony that made it hard to think. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, my breath coming in panicked gasps. "Please, leave me alone," I screamed, but the figures didn't flinch. Then the tallest one, the first one I'd seen, stepped closer. It leaned down, its face inches from the glass, and I finally saw it. There was no face, just a void, a dark, endless emptiness that seemed to pull at me, dragging my mind into its abyss. My vision blurred, and I felt like I was falling, like gravity had shifted and I was being sucked into that terrible, gaping nothingness. But then, out of nowhere, a deafening roar shattered the silence. A massive figure barreled out of the woods. A bear, its fur matted and scarred, its eyes wild with fury. It charged into the circle, swiping and roaring, scattering the figures like leaves in the wind. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Somehow, my legs moved, and I threw myself out of the car, sprinting toward the woods in the opposite direction. Branches tore at my skin, the undergrowth tangling around my ankles, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally collapsed, the forest was silent again. No whistles, no footsteps, no shadowy figures, just the distant hum of the wind through the trees. I lay there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, until the first light of dawn broke through the canopy. I stumbled out of the woods later that day, finding a dirt road and flagging down a passing truck. The driver asked what had happened to me, but I couldn't find the words. What could I say? That I'd been hunted by creatures that shouldn't exist? I never went back to that cabin. Never told anyone the full story. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear it again. 2 notes. Long then short. And I know they're still out there, watching, waiting. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That I left Black Hollow Woods and never looked back. But you don't escape something like that. Not really. The first few weeks after I got home were a blur. I told my friends I'd cut the trip short because of car trouble, and they didn't push for details. But the nightmares started almost immediately. In my dreams, I was back in the woods, standing in the clearing by the cabin. The figures surrounded me again, their hollow, faceless voids staring. The whistling was always there, those same 2 notes, long then short. But it wasn't just in my dreams. One night, a few weeks later, I was home alone. The TV was on, more for background noise than anything else. I was finally starting to convince myself it was over, that the things in the woods were just some terrible hallucination brought on by isolation and fear. Then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it. 2 notes, long then short. I bolted upright, my chest tightening. The sound was faint, coming from outside my apartment window. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone outside, messing around. But when I peered through the blinds, my blood ran cold. Down on the street, bathed in the sickly glow of the streetlights, was a figure. Tall, thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. It stood perfectly still, facing my building. Though it was too far to see clearly, I felt its gaze, heavy and suffocating. And then it tilted its head. I stumbled back from the window, my breath hitching. My heart raced as I tried to decide what to do. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice shaking as I told them someone was outside my apartment, acting strangely. The dispatcher said they'd send someone, but by the time the patrol car arrived, the figure was gone. For weeks, I lived in a state of constant fear. Every time I heard a whistle, even on TV or in passing, my stomach clenched. I kept the curtains drawn, double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, and jumped at every shadow. But the whistling didn't stop. Sometimes it was faint, like it was coming from far away. Other times it was close, too close, like it was just outside my door. And it wasn't always alone. One night, I woke to the sound of movement in the hallway outside my apartment. Soft, shuffling steps, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic whistling. My blood froze. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The sound stopped right outside my door. Then came the knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps. I grabbed the fire poker I'd kept since the cabin, my hands trembling as I crept toward the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the door. My heart pounded so loudly I almost didn't hear it. The faint sound of breathing, deep and slow, on the other side. And then, from the other side of the door, came the whistle. 2 notes, long then short. I stood frozen at the door, my breath shallow, my grip tightening on the fire poker. The breathing on the other side grew louder, heavier, as if whatever was there knew it was terrifying me. My body screamed for me to run, to do anything but stand there, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. I waited, straining to hear something, anything, but the silence was deafening. My mind raced. Was it gone? Was it waiting for me to open the door? Every instinct told me not to look, but something deeper, curiosity maybe, or sheer desperation, compelled me. I unlocked the door and cracked it open, just enough to peek outside. The hallway was empty. No shadows, no figures. Just the dim flicker of the overhead light and the faint hum of the building's heating system. I stepped out cautiously, my bare feet cold against the floor. I scanned the hallway, gripping the fire poker tightly, ready for something to lunge at me. But there was nothing. Then I looked down. Scrawled on the floor in front of my door, written in what looked like ash, were 2 words, "Come back." My stomach churned, and I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. My mind spiraled with questions. Why me? What did they want? What would happen if I went back to the woods? The next day, I made a decision. Running wasn't working. Hiding wasn't working. I needed to end this, whatever this was. I packed a bag with the essentials: flashlights, food, and a hunting knife I'd borrowed from a friend. Then I drove back to Black Hollow Woods. The sun was setting when I reached the cabin. It looked exactly as I remembered, weathered and crooked, like it had been waiting for me. The clearing around it was eerily silent, the trees looming like sentinels guarding a secret. I stepped inside, the musty smell of the cabin wrapping around me like a shroud. Dust motes danced in the fading light streaming through the cracked windows. I set up a small fire in the hearth and waited. Night fell quickly, and with it came the familiar sound. 2 notes, long then short. This time it wasn't distant. It was close, just outside the cabin. I gripped the fire poker and stood in the center of the room. Every muscle in my body coiled like a spring. The front door creaked open. I didn't open it. I hadn't even touched it. But now it hung ajar, revealing the pitch-black woods beyond. The whistle sounded again, louder, more insistent, and then I saw them, the figures. They emerged from the tree lean, one by one, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their faceless heads tilted toward me as they closed the distance to the cabin. I backed away, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then the tallest one stepped into the doorway. Why me? I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. It tilted its head, as if considering the question. Then, in a voice that was neither human nor animal, it rasped, "You saw us. You left." It stepped closer, its long limbs folding unnaturally as it crouched to my level. "No one leaves. Come back, or join us." I don't know what came over me, but I did the only thing I could think of. I swung the fire poker with everything I had, striking the thing square in its void-like face. It didn't scream or flinch, it just shattered into ash, crumbling to the floor in a pile of soot. The other figures stopped. For a moment, they stood perfectly still, as if stunned. Then they began to dissolve, their forms disintegrating into the same dark ash, carried away on an unnatural wind that howled through the open door. And just like that, they were gone. I left the cabin that night and never looked back. The woods didn't chase me this time. Maybe I'd broken whatever hold they had. Or maybe they're still waiting, watching, biding their time. I don't know why I survived when so many others didn't. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whistle. 2 notes, long then short, and I wonder how long my luck will last. Weeks passed after I left Black Hollow Woods for the second time. Life returned to a fragile normality. I worked during the day, avoided the news, and slept fitfully at night. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped. The whistle stopped. The ash marks never reappeared. Yet, something lingered, an unshakable sense that I wasn't alone, even in my own home. I chalked it up to paranoia, the kind of trauma that sticks with you after an experience like mine. But deep down, I knew better. The confirmation came one night, about a month after I'd destroyed the figures. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was sitting on my couch, flipping through old photographs. I'd been trying to distract myself, to reclaim some semblance of peace. But then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a text. No sender. No number. Just a single message. "You think it's over?" I stared at the screen, my stomach flipping. My hand shook as I dropped the phone onto the coffee table. Moments later, the buzzing started again. Message after message flooded my phone, each one saying the same thing: "Come back." I grabbed the phone, intending to shut it off, but the screen wouldn't respond. It just kept buzzing, the words blinking like a taunt. Then the lights in my apartment flickered. I froze. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin. And then I heard it. Not outside, not far away. The whistle. 2 notes, long then short. It was coming from inside the apartment. I ran into the kitchen, grabbing the hunting knife I'd kept since the cabin. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the room. The whistle echoed again, bouncing off the walls, impossibly loud. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, dark shapes that shouldn't have been there. Then I saw it. Standing in the corner of the living room, just outside the circle of light cast by the lamp, was one of them. Tall, twisted, its faceless void staring straight at me. My blood turned to ice as it tilted its head, the motion slow and deliberate. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. I brandished the knife, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence suffocating, the whistle ringing in my ears. Then it spoke. "You belong to us now." Its voice was wrong, layered, like 1,000 whispers speaking in unison. I stepped back, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. "No, I don't." The figure took a single step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. The shadows around it seemed to writhe, stretching across the room like they were alive. "You saw," it said. "You stayed. You left. But you never leave." I don't know what came over me, but I lunged. I swung the knife at the figure with all my strength, expecting it to dissolve into ash like the others had. But this one didn't. The blade passed through it as if it were smoke, and the figure didn't even flinch. It leaned closer, its empty void of a face inches from mine. "Come back," it whispered, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in my bed. The knife was gone, and my apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I stumbled out of bed, checking every room, but there was no sign of the figure. No messages on my phone. No ash. Nothing. But when I looked out the window, I saw it. Across the street, standing under the streetlight, was the figure. It didn't move. It didn't whistle. It just watched. And that's where it stays. Every night it's there, always watching, waiting. And every night, the whistle grows louder in my mind. 2 notes. Long then short. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I don't know what they'll do next. But I do know one thing. You never really leave Black Hollow Woods. It's been months now. The figure is always there, standing under the streetlight. Never closer, never farther. Just watching. At first, I tried ignoring it, tried convincing myself it was a hallucination. But you can't ignore something that feels like it's crawling under your skin, even when it's not there. The whistle still haunts me. It follows me everywhere. At work, in the grocery store, in the dead of night when I'm lying in bed. 2 notes. Long then short. It's not just in my head. I hear it in the world around me. A distant car horn. The squeak of old hinges. The hum of the wind through the trees. It's always there, hiding, waiting. I tried moving, packed up everything I owned and drove across the country, as far from Black Hollow Woods as I could get. For a while I thought it worked. The whistle faded. The figure under the streetlight disappeared. I almost let myself believe I was free. But then one night, in the quiet of my new apartment, I heard it again. 2 notes. Long then short. When I looked out the window, the figure was back. The same one, as if it had never left. Only this time it wasn't alone. Others stood beside it, their hollow faces all turned toward me. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I've come to accept what they told me. You don't leave Black Hollow Woods. Not really. I may have walked out, but a part of me stayed behind, and they've been coming to claim the rest ever since. They don't want to kill me. That would be too simple. They want something else, something I can't explain. Maybe it's my fear, my soul, my sanity. Whatever it is, they're patient. They know they'll get it eventually. I can feel them getting closer. They're no longer waiting outside. They're here now in the shadows of my home, in the corners of my vision, in the space just behind me when I turn too quickly. I don't know if anyone else has survived an encounter with them. Maybe I'm the only one, or maybe there are others out there, hearing the same whistle, living the same nightmare. If you're one of them, let this be a warning. Don't go back to the woods. Don't follow the whistle. Don't try to understand them. Just run, and pray they don't find you. As for me, I know my time is running out. The whistle is louder now, constant, drilling into my skull. And as I write this, I can hear the faintest sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I don't think I'll finish this story. They're here. 2 notes. long then short, and I think they're finally ready to take me. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.